Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President and Chief Executive Officer for GTT, Rick Calder.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rick Calder, President and CEO of GTT, a proud Red Cross supporter, board member, and sponsor of this event. GTT, we're a telecoms firm. Our purpose predominantly is helping organizations, large multinational enterprises, governments, connect people across the world to any location in the world, to any application in the cloud. We generally deal with large enterprises and their chief information officers. And a recent survey said their single number one most important concern is security and making their businesses secure. And security in general is a form of disaster preparedness because every enterprise at some stage will have a security incident at some point. And so the depth of disaster preparedness in corporations is a key element of what we help them with and what enterprises are really concerned about today. Quick story, just yesterday I had an hour-long conversation with the Chief Information Officer of IATA, IATA, the International Air Transport Authority, who helps 290 airlines around the world prepare for security events. And so one of the things that we just talked about is the next level of security planning that they and the airline industry specifically need to go through to prepare for disaster planning. Our next session will discuss how to prepare your organization and your employees, as well as best practices in business disaster preparedness. Our moderator, Dr. Cedric Sims, is a senior leader within Booz Allen's Justice, Homeland Security, and Transportation business. Cedric develops strategies to foster integration across the Department of Homeland Security and delivers expertise, primarily cyber and analytics, to support complex missions. He has more than 25 years of experience in acquisitions and risk management, cybersecurity, capital planning, portfolio and program governance, and systems engineering applied to Homeland Security missions. If you have questions, as we noted earlier, we'll be doing live Q&A at the end of the panel by microphone, by card drop, or by text. So be thinking about your questions. Cedric will introduce our panelists, and you can read all speaker and panelist bios on our current event webpage. Now, please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Cedric Sims.
Good morning. Hopefully everybody's doing well. And Rick, thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you very much to the Red Cross. I'm glad to be here on behalf of Booz Allen Hamilton here at this excellent summit. I have to tell you that I'm very, very impressed with the level of attendance, and hopefully you'll find this to be a very exciting discussion and panel. So with that, I'd like to introduce two fantastic panelists that we have. First, Chelsie McLaughlin, Director of Customer Engagement and Support at Choice Hotels. And second, from my former agency, Brian Harrell, Assistant Secretary, Infrastructure Protection, U.S. Department of Homeland Security. We're going to have a very exciting panel today. We're going to discuss some things about what a well-prepared business does for their employees, and also what actions these organizations are taking today. Best practices that allow us to do more effective risk communication, and other things that will help us employ what sort of special considerations there are around preparedness that will allow us to meet the needs of those with special access and functional needs. So with that, I'd like to give the podium to Brian. Brian, would you like to open our discussion?
All right. Well, thank you, Cedric, for the introduction. Thank you to the American Red Cross for having me. Certainly a pleasure to be here. Here in Washington, D.C., there's a lot going on at any given point in time. And so having you guys today is really just a testament to the dedication that you guys have towards resilience, redundancy, helping people in their time of need. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about security. So my focus area is obviously on critical infrastructure protection, but today it's really talking about some of the resources and the things that we are doing within the United States Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. So formerly known as NPPD, the National Protection and Programs Directorate. Say that 10 times fast. And bonus points if you even knew what it meant. But today, as we walk through the door and we exchange business cards, and people have an inherent understanding as to why it is that we're actually there before we even exchange that business card. That value proposition, that return on investment, in my opinion, is there and is inherent with the name change. At the end of the day, we are there to help reduce risk, help manage risk. And we are our nation's risk advisors. And notice I didn't say nation's risk managers. Really, that is your job. Your job is to manage the risk. 85% of all critical infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector. And today, I'm here to tell you that we are trying to be a better resource for you as we move forward. I think within the Department of Homeland Security, we've done a lot of great things over the last 15 years that nobody knows about. And so today is an opportunity to be a little bit more visible, a little bit more talkative about some of the products, services, and subject matter expertise that we have, and that's really what I want to try and do today. So our mission is very clear, and that is to lead the national effort and understand and manage risk to our critical infrastructure. And our vision is very succinct. We want secure and resilient infrastructure for the American people. I can tell you that the workforce, the individuals within the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, CISA, are very focused on this particular mission. They get up every single morning, well over 3,000 of them, to really focus on how do I be a better resource, how do I push better products and services into private industry, and that's really a major focus area for us. 5 focus areas that we're really focused on right now within CISA, and in no particular order. First and foremost would be the 5G supply chain and the risk of Chinese espionage. You probably didn't come to a Red Cross event thinking that I was going to talk about Chinese espionage. But today is, as many of you who come from private industry can attest, we're seeing this in our systems day in and day out. There are nation-state actors that are focused on degrading, destroying, and or taking information from your system to their system so they can leapfrog ahead of you. And much of this is being done through espionage from our nation-state actors. Industrial control systems, ICS, OT, SCADA, whatever we want to call it, this is a major focus area for us as well. And now, what are these systems? These are the big systems that are pushing electricity from point A to point B. They're cleaning your drinking water. They're making critical chemicals that we use day in and day out. And it's these systems, oftentimes, that are being operated by legacy systems from the 80s and 90s that have been unpatched. And for a long time, we have leaned on the fact that there is ignorance within the private sector, there is ignorance within the nation-state actors about industrial control systems. That ignorance is gone. I can tell you that this is a major focus area for those nation-state actors that are intent on doing significant damage to very critical systems within the United States. And so today, we must not have unpatched legacy systems that are providing critical services to the United States of America. Protecting government networks. And notice I did not say protecting federal government networks. Today, as we've seen the ransomware attacks throughout our state and local ecosystems, this is an opportunity for us with our indicators of compromise, with our industry best practices, with the information that we have in terms of cyber hygiene as to how to battle back the issue of ransomware. Today, we've seen this across the entire threat landscape. We're seeing this at the feds, the local and state level, and so it is our opportunity to be a little bit more Johnny on the spot with some of the resources that we have. Elections. In 2016, nation states were a part of our elections. I can tell you that they did not change from one vote to another. However, they did have a significant influence campaign. We saw them again in 2018, and we will see them again in 2020. So what do we do about it? I can tell you that we have engaged all 50 secretaries of state. We have stood up an elections information sharing and analysis center to where we can have near real-time information sharing with those that need it. If we see an issue that is happening in New York State, we are able to push information to Los Angeles rapidly. That infrastructure, that communication dialogue and channel was not in place years ago. And lastly, soft targets, and crowded places. All we have to do is watch the TV day in and day out where we see the trail of blood. While ones and zeros are incredibly important, and there are, again, actors who are focused on critical infrastructure and taking away and degrading and destroying cyber systems, it is the physical security, it is the emergency management piece that we must never, ever lose sight of. Within the soft target arena, we are seeing in El Paso, we are seeing in Dayton, we have seen it at the Garlic Festival in Gilroy, California. And the list goes on and on and on, especially when you start adding schools and other soft targets, crowded places, stadiums, zoos, malls, the marathon that you might run this weekend. These are institutions, these are campuses that don't necessarily have that robust security apparatus in place. It is incumbent upon the Department of Homeland Security to be a resource to them as well. And we will. Society is becoming more and more violent. There are racially motivated hate groups, extremist groups, and those individuals that are already here in the United States that are focused on the weak security apparatus that may exist at the restaurants, at the zoos, at the museums, at the large box stores, etc. And so today we have a number of resources that are absolutely free. You've already paid for them. But right now, when you go to dhs.gov/hometown security, it is chock full of a number of resources, guidelines, exercises in a box, white papers, the ability to have a security clearance back and forth, and making that request to the Department of Homeland Security through this website is a one-stop shop of the resources that you need to become a harder target today. Really quick, because Cedric has given me the eye up here, there's a number of things that I have said over the last number of speeches that I've given. I've only been here about 13 months. I'm still Nick, the new guy here. But over the last 25 years of my career, I've really focused on kind of 5 areas, and this has been learned through lessons learned on the battlefield, within corporate security, within military law enforcement, and now through the government lens. And number 1, understanding the threat landscape is changing. The Department of Homeland Security that you see today is dramatically different than the threats and the institution that we stood up back in 2003. We must focus on nation-state adversaries. We must focus on those who are focused on soft targets in crowded places. Individuals, owners, operators of critical infrastructure are on the front lines of this battle. It isn't necessarily the government. And so we must have that mentality that when I go back to the shop, when I go back to my organization in Southern California or wherever you reside, the mentality must be, it is not if, it is in fact when, and am I prepared? Am I resilient? Have I made the right investments to remove single points of failure, to add redundancy to the system with the assumption that something bad is going to happen? A lot of this is done through exercising. We do not magically get better in our time of need, in our time of crisis. We always revert back, we always default to the things that we know, things that we have seen, things that we have heard, things that we have smelled, and this is why exercising is absolutely critical. This is why law enforcement and military train day in and day out. You default to the things that you know. Are we doing a good job within private industry of the same? Understanding your gaps. It is on the folds, it's on the margins, it's where you're not looking that the enemy will in fact exploit. And so please be very, very mindful of just because you've dotted the I's, you've crossed the T's, you have a good compliance program, you have a strong security apparatus in place, what about those that you are dependent on? What about those third parties that you absolutely need to produce your critical power or your clean water or whatever the case might be? The convergence between physical and cyber. Rarely do we see a cyber-only attack, a physical-only attack. Today, this threat landscape is absolutely converged. And we've been talking about this for a number of years now. However, we still see organizations where it's siloed. Cybersecurity still belongs over here with the CIO. Corporate security still belongs way over here under whomever. Emergency management is under ops. Today, the threat landscape is converged. It is hybrid. And we must organize our own org charts as such. And lastly, information sharing is key. We've been talking about this for a long, long time. Right after this speech, there'll be a new article on some magazine, some website somewhere talking about the importance of information sharing. But I can tell you it is key under blue sky conditions that we have the relationships with the FBI, your local protective security advisor, your local law enforcement, to where you are not building your crisis response plans in the midst of crisis. Quick little story before I get yanked off stage here, and that is, years ago, I was a deputy sheriff in Los Angeles. And throughout the day, you had a number of incidents that happened, and you had to do your reports. And typically, as a deputy sheriff, you would find a quiet place to do those reports. And typically, I would park my black and white, because we have black and whites in California, right in front of an elementary school. And you might think to yourself, well, wow, that's great. I mean, you're making that elementary school a hard target. That's not why I did it at all. I did it because I knew that on the other side of that door was a free cup of coffee. And so all day you had this revolving door of law enforcement, black and white vehicles out in front of that elementary school for next to nothing. What low-cost, no-cost things can we do today to, again, make you a harder target? And I know that through the question and answer, we'll start getting into convergence and insider threat and some of the other things. So Cedric, back to you, sir.
Brian, thank you so much. To be clear, that was not me giving him the eye. It was an awe. It was, I miss the mission. It's in my blood. And thank you again for serving and coming from the private sector, which I would like to encourage all of you to understand that when we talk about the low-cost opportunities, there are some costs that we can give, and some of that is your time and your service, sometimes in government service, but also to what you do in industry to make sure that everything that we do in the government is as effective and efficient as it can be. So Brian, thank you again for your service. With that, I'd like to transition over to Chelsie. Shall we? Ready?
Absolutely. So in order to practice what we preach, I am going to mitigate risk by not going up to the podium. There will be no tripping, there will be no dress mishaps. I'm just gonna stay seated right here. So I'm Chelsie McLaughlin, and I am the Director of Customer Engagement and Support for Choice Hotels International. And that means a whole lot of things, but for the purposes of this conversation, it means that I oversee some venues of disaster preparedness for Choice Hotels. Of course, as a franchising company, we have a lot of ways in which we prepare for disasters, and really those can be boiled down to our areas overseeing employees, our customers, and our hotels, which, for the record, really are all three of my customers. But for our employees, we have, and I want to say, whenever I go to conferences, the thing that's the most important to me is to have tangible ideas that I can walk away with, and I think that's even more important at a conference like this. So I'm going to talk at a very high level about all of the things that we offer, and then through question and answer, I'm happy to delve into that if there's anything that's particularly interesting to anybody in the audience who would like to hopefully steal from that idea a little bit. But for our employees, we have a myriad of things. We have text and app communications. We provide first aid and disaster prep training, and we also have certified employees throughout all of our buildings and all of our floors. Something else that was actually just offered was mental health first aid training, which was, I literally just went through it on Thursday, and that was something I think we all need to be taking much more seriously and have people at the ready for that. So I'm officially certified in mental health first aid. I'm told that that does not allow me to provide medicine or diagnosis, but I can talk through anything you'd like to. We also have worldwide contact centers, and truly the reason that we've set that up is for disaster preparedness. Just 2 weeks ago, we had a volcano erupting less than 10 miles from one of our contact centers in Manila, Philippines, in an effort to make sure our employees were truly cared for, as well as our customers not running into issues trying to contact and make a reservation or contact the customer care departments. We have disaster preparedness in which we can then route those calls to any one of 9 other contact center locations, which takes care of both our employees and our customers. And we also have employee resource groups. I happen to be the chair of our Pride resource group, and that's part of the reason that we have the mental health first aid training is we get to be people that our associates can come to and hopefully mitigate some future problems that might arise by having people that are just available to talk to. For our customers, one of the things that we take great pride in, and I oversee our loyalty department, we actually have the opportunity and are partnered directly with the American Red Cross. So when disasters happen, our employee and customer base can actually donate points to the American Red Cross to directly help fund efforts when there is a disaster happening or is being recovered from. And we also have a crisis management response team, which handles anything from cyber threats to things going viral on social media, as I'm sure you can imagine, with over 8,000 hotels and a lot of employees who work at those hotels. Unfortunate things can and do happen, and a real risk is our reputation on social media. And then for our hotels, what I find is really interesting is following Hurricane Katrina, we realized that when our hotels are undergoing some sort of natural disaster or high stress situation, the last thing that they should have to do is worry about customers who might show up later, as opposed to those that are there right now and running the operations. And so we started what we call Choice Cares. I was not responsible for that name, but I wish I was, because it's great, we care. And what we do is we do disaster recovery virtually for our hotels, in which if a hotel is in a flooded zone and they're not able to take incoming customers, they can contact my team directly. We'll outreach to all of those customers and either help facilitate a new reservation at a different location or just cancel those reservations. We have people who are activated right now for the coronavirus who are making sure that our customers who may be going to hotels in China or people coming from China to stay in our hotels, just reaching out to them and saying, do you still want to come? Are you still traveling? How can we assist you? And then we also have a portion of that will actually reach out to our government agencies like FEMA or American Red Cross and ask, do you need housing at any of our locations in order to respond to a disaster? And then we'll facilitate with our hotels that are still open and operating how we can get emergency response personnel a safe place to stay while they're there responding to the disaster. So as I said, there are a myriad of things. There is even more that we do from a technological space, but you don't want to ask me about that. As a matter of fact, we partner with AWS, so find one of those people. They're great. They'll be able to tell you what we do from a technological standpoint. So that's the kind of, like I said, the myriad of ways in which we prepare for our employees, our guests, and our hoteliers, and I'm happy to delve into any of those if there are questions about that.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Just a quick little bit of preparation for us. Toward the end of our panel, we'll take the opportunity to take some questions from the audience, and so I would want to start there. I already have some cards with some questions on them, so if you have some really neat things you'd like to talk about with these fantastic panelists, please capture your question in that moment and be ready to ask that so we can have a really robust discussion here. Thank you very much for the introductory comments. I was glad to hear about your point donation program. Within Booz Allen, we do something similar. We certainly have experienced our own employees being impacted by disasters and things on that order. And so for financial assistance, we've done things like set up an emergency loan program for employees that are affected by natural disasters, as well as leave donation programs, and also the ability for the employee themselves to receive certain kinds of leave in order to be able to come off of their billable work, if you will, and still be able to receive pay and things on that order while they're going through a recovery process. So that ability to share within your organization and everybody to contribute is really important. Brian, if I may, I'd like to shift over to you. And there's this construct around keeping watch and managing risk. And a lot of times we talk about that in terms of things that are outside of our organization, right? You talked about the existential threat of some other nation states and things on that order. But can you give us a little bit of an idea of what CISA is doing about the emerging practice area of insider threat? And what does that ultimately mean for CISA, and what kind of resources do you have available for that?
Sure. Well, I guess you invite the security guy, you're going to get a security talk, and so that's fine. That's our sweet spot. But I do want to kind of broaden the conversation to NGOs and kind of the volunteerism that takes place as well. And so, as Cedric just mentioned, yes, there are a number of threats coming from the outside of the perimeter of our organizations, but there's also some from within as well. We know this is known as the insider threat, or at least threat management, and having a threat management program. And so if I'm going to advise somebody on how to build out their budgets for the future in terms of investments in security, I would certainly point to standing up an insider threat program. Do we understand who works for us? Do we understand the people that we have that are logging in and attaching their devices maybe to our system day in and day out? And some might say, well, yeah, we do background checks every 7 years, we're good. And I can tell you that mentality was great 20 years ago. That is no longer good enough. We need to go through what's called continuous evaluation, always understanding what's happening on our system at any point in time, understanding who is there, what are they doing, what access do they have. And this isn't necessarily about Big Brother looking over the shoulder. This is about monitoring active threats and the content that is being passed between your system and somebody else's system, or simply maybe going on to and looking at hate speech and hate kinds of things on your system. And so if you're going to make investments, in my humble opinion, it is in fact to create and stand up a threat management program where you include operations, human resources, security, legal, et cetera, and really understand through governance how we're monitoring employees. And this is both done on the physical and the cyber side. So understanding what people are doing on the cyber side, what information is leaving your system at any point in time. Everyone in here at least one day probably wants to be a consultant. And so typically, right before you become a consultant and you're working at a big company, what do? You typically send all of that proprietary information, all of that contact information, all of that good stuff to your Gmail. But somebody's also maybe sending it to nation-state actors. Maybe it's to your competitor as well. So understanding through data classification what is leaving your system at any point in time. Do we have the technology in place to send up the bells, the whistles, the red flags when information is leaving that you care about? Proprietary information, trade secrets, customer information, credit card information. Do you know what's leaving? And then on the physical side, understanding that there is a pathway to violence. Understand that through the human resource world, we need to be able to have channels of communication that are continuously open so that when somebody says something nefarious, violent, bad, we have channels in which to communicate this. The last thing we want to have happen is an event, whether it's an active shooter or something else, where somebody says, you know what, man, I saw that coming 2 weeks ago. He did or she did this, this, and this, and we were never able to put those puzzle pieces together. Having the threat management program for alert, for situation awareness, to give that chief security officer, to give that COO some visibility as to what's happening across the entire spectrum of his or her organization is critical.
Thank you very much. I'm going to throw a little curveball in here because I think that my next question for Chelsie, I just received a very interesting question from the audience. I'm going to blend this here for we can have a bit of a broader discussion. So I'd like to know a little bit about what organizations such as yours are actually doing to be a well-prepared business, and what are you doing for your organization and your employees, and if I may include part of this, are there things that you as an organization have learned from external events such as the Las Vegas shooting that might you might adapt to when you're doing your planning and preparedness?
Absolutely. So great questions. And I will say, I think Brian actually teed up the first part of that answer great in that you really have to be thoughtful and mindful about ensuring that you are going to make a plan and then actually start making it. And so as I mentioned, we have a lot of different areas of our company play a part in our disaster recovery, whether it may be an incident that affects one of our contact centers or an incident like the flooding in Houston, Texas. I'm sure you can imagine we have a lot of properties that were affected in Houston, Texas. But also the things that Brian was talking about, like information security or insider threats. And so it is important that any company truly thinks about the very smallest risk to the very biggest. So for us, one of the things, as a specific example, one of the things that we thought about is, we should really set up text or app communications for our employees just to let them know that the contact center is closing today. So here specifically, we have a site in Rockville, Maryland, and all you East Coasters, little bit of snow hits the ground and y'all close. So we wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to very quickly and easily communicate with our associates and let them know the office is going to be closed today. You can work from home or you get a free day off. Congratulations. And that turned into, we could use this for so many more things. We could use this for true disaster preparedness or communication if there is a true threat. That's something that we would leverage in the event that there was, say, an active shooter situation within our office building. So think about those small things, and it seems much easier to then make a plan and prepare for them. In the last session, it was talked about that we've kind of complicated it and made it feel daunting to start a plan. So think about it that way. Think about the little things and then the ways in which you can leverage that for the potential bigger threats. And that's one of the ways in which we've really kind of evolved at Choice, but certainly we've learned from every event, and really what ends up impacting us are things like those natural disasters with hurricanes or flooding, or maybe even it affects just one hotel and there's a fire at one individual hotel. We learned from every one of those events in order to make sure that we are more effective, that we are quicker. So we leverage new technology. Instead of me having to mobilize 50 agents that have to call over 3,000 customers for maybe a 2-day period of arrivals, instead we've now leveraged technology in order to make those outbound phone calls to customers so that auto dialer can call and reach those 8,000 customers in 2 minutes, in which I would have been mobilizing a task force of 50 people to make those phone calls. So it's all about just learning and becoming more and more effective after each incident. Take your learnings and apply them.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Chelsie. If you don't mind, I'm going to do a little bit of the same thing. Again, another great question that leads us into our next question. In this increasing and complex threat environment, how do we get ahead of the curve? But we also had a question from the audience about perhaps the increased use of automation in dealing with some of these threats, and does that automation in fact also induce risk? Mm-hmm. So you can speak to those aspects.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think this is our challenge when we start really doing a deep dive on what does infrastructure protection in the year 2045 and 2050 look like. When everything's connected, when your cell phone's connected to my cell phone, which is connected to a coffee pot, which is connected to a refrigerator, which is connected to a 69 kV distribution substation right down the road. These new technology, while it's great, my kids absolutely love it, it also introduces a number of enemy avenues of approach. And we need to make sure that we are very mindful and we are building in security from the beginning and not necessarily bolting it on in the rear. That is the old mentality. When they were building this building, I'm sure security was at the forefront, given that it's a government building, and they were part and parcel of the conversation from the get-go. And as we build our IT systems, as we think about disaster response and recovery, security on the ground must be a forethought. It must be thought of immediately. We have seen these instances where we have deployed our assets or our field personnel to Puerto Rico, St. Croix, Virgin Islands, whatever the case is, and immediately it's, yes, we need to restore, yes, we need to recover, but we also need to protect our people. And so technology plays a big role in this, and this is really where I was going with earlier on the convergence piece. Everything is connected. The threat landscape impacts cyber and physical. Today, as you guys go back to your shop and you badge in utilizing your proximity card or your access card to get in, that physical security technology is internet facing. The cameras that you guys are using are IP based. And so we cannot let, as an example, these cybersecurity channels to be the enemy avenue of approach to get into our physical security systems and vice versa. Today, everything is converged, and it's no longer good enough to say, yeah, we meet with cybersecurity every other Tuesday. We have a good program. Everything is converged today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Chelsie, can you speak to some of the special considerations for preparedness, especially for those with access or functional needs?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we offer to our properties is that we will step in and we will help care for customers who are potentially arriving or may now not be arriving due to a natural disaster. So there are things that we absolutely have to take into consideration when either relocating or canceling. One of the things that obviously comes to my mind first is assisting people who have ADA accommodations. And so that's something that's always at the forefront of our mind, especially if we have to relocate somebody and it is then maybe a low availability situation. We need to make sure that those things are a priority, so we're really taking care of customers who have very specific needs, and that we need to be able to provide them. So as we go through any of our disaster preparedness scenarios, whether in drill or in real life, we also make sure that we're specifically prioritizing how we are going after situations, whether it is for our customer base or our employee base, to make sure that we're meeting the needs not only of all of our customers, but very specifically our customers who are coming to us because we provide a specific care for them. And like I said, that the first thing that kind of comes to my mind is ADA accommodations, and obviously in the hospitality industry, that ranges from items on our website to actually physically being at the hotel. And so that's a place where we make sure that we are specifically very focused, especially as we enter into a potential disaster scenario.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We just have maybe one more question up here, and then I'd love to turn it over to you, the audience, to seek your discussion, to join us for this excellent panel. So how would you recommend, this Brian is for you, how would you recommend that businesses and organizations prepare for these threats? What sort of resources are available?
There's a number of resources through FEMA, CISA, DHS at large, ready.gov, these kinds of resource areas. And I think it's important to tap into some of that. It's all free. And I think at times we suffer from everyone within our organizations is wearing multiple hats. One hat that day happens to be security, and so it's about really just taking the time to do the research, see what is out there. These are built on industry best practices. These are built on incidents and disasters that have happened in the past, and today I think it's fruitful information. I mentioned the website earlier, dhs.gov/hometown security. If you're looking for who your protective security advisor is in your backyard. We have 119 of them. They're in the field. They are a resource for you to walk that property, do a threat and vulnerability assessment, start building out the response and recovery plans from incidents. That is available today. If you're looking to have a robust conversation at the secret or top secret level, we have the ability and we own what's known as the private sector clearance program. And so we can have that conversation back and forth as threats materialize. Also, we have what's known as an exercise in a box. And as the name implies, it is a ready-to-go exercise. We build a scenario based off of your needs. We even drill all the way down to the sign-in sheets that you need in which to run a successful exercise at your organization. We've already thought about everything. We've pushed out nearly 10,000 of these exercises in a box, and they're absolutely free. All you have to do is request. And so again, these things are available. It's just a matter of, do you know they exist? And part of my role here as, I guess, the chief storytelling officer within DHS is to try and make this a little bit more visible and well-known.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, we've got a lot of action from our audience, so thank you. What I'm going to ask you to do, stick your hand up. I've got one quick lightning round question, and so please stick your hand up. Hopefully we'll get some mics queued to you, and I want to go to the audience so we can be efficient with the remainder of our time. I'm going to ask each of you this question. So if there were one thing that you would recommend that a business or organization do in the context of this discussion we just had, what would that thing be? So Chelsie, we'll start with you.
I'll make it very simple and just say start. Make sure that you are doing something, that you're having conversations. If you don't know what your disaster preparedness plan looks like right now, start asking those questions. I guarantee no matter how small or big your company is, no matter how robust that plan is, it can always be better, and it will only get better if it's being questioned and it's being worked on. Earlier in the opening session, it was said, hope is not a plan. So I hope that none of you are sitting here thinking, do we have a plan at our company and how do we start it? Just start is my advice.
Thank you so much. Brian?
I would say operate with the understanding that your worst day could be right around the corner. And I don't say that to be overly dramatic or anything like that. But I think at times we say, wow, I hope that thing that happened overseas doesn't happen here. I hope that the active shooter scenario that took place in El Paso, Texas at a Walmart, I hope that doesn't happen at my Walmart or within my organization. I think we must assume that at some point you will in fact have your worst day. And are you prepared to be overwhelmed? When the fog of war sets in, when information is incomplete, when everyone is screaming on the radio at the exact same time and blood has been spilled, are you prepared to be overwhelmed? And if the answer is no, what are you doing about it? What relation?
Were you testing us?
Is everybody awake? Everybody prepared? Do you know where the emergency exits are? No.
Right on cue.
Thank you. That was
Did we
not,
respond
Brian, that was not the
accordingly?
hook, by the way, all right? So after everybody's, kind of your heartbeats come back down to normal, say we'll get back into the discussion. Thank you all for still staying. No one jumped out of their seats, so thank goodness. Whoa, okay, hopefully that's not me. I just want to add one more thing to this, if I can share. Is it me? You think it's me? It's my phone? Okay. One more thing I'd like to add to this for all of you, and I would often say this in my engagements with my colleagues at the Department of Homeland Security.
I think we could hear your heartbeat. You just got an EKG.
That's really awesome. Are we live? Can you hear me? Okay,
Yeah.
good. Wow, that's pretty awesome. Hopefully my heart was like normal there. So, never had that happen before.
Prepared.
I would often say this to my colleagues at the Department of Homeland Security. These circumstances often end the way that they begin. And I think that the point here that's trying to be made is that the beginning is now. Start, be prepared, be ready. Because how it ends is how it begins. And so if you're not prepared, I promise you the event will not go well. If you are prepared, you at least have a much better chance of actually being successful. So with that, do we have any questions that we have from the audience? Why don't we start right here?
Hi, Erica Ingram from Booz Allen Hamilton. Could you talk a bit more about the mental health first aid training? So I actually work in our people services organization, which includes, among other functions, HR and ER. So just wondering, is it something you built in-house or went to market for? Who is the audience and just a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Erica. It was offered for the first time in our Rockville office about a month ago, and then offered in our Phoenix office where I reside, like I said, just this last Thursday. It was actually provided by Cigna, who is our Choice Hotels healthcare provider. And what they did is the first group they rolled it out to was specifically our human resources organization, but they also invited our chairs of our employee resource groups. We are already people who others in the association come to and look towards to get advice, to talk to be there for them. And so that's why they invited the heads of those employee resource groups, which I'm a part of, which is why I got invited to it. And so in there, it was truly very informational, but also specifically taught you as an associate how to work through something if you have another associate in the office who is in a psychosis event, or is potentially suicidal, or even to the very simple does not react well to a constructive conversation. So it was actually a very well done conversation and training, and is something that I truly highly encourage everybody to look into. I'm fairly knowledgeable in terms of mental health, and having seen it personally and in my personal life. I took away more from this training than I ever thought that I would, even just from a knowledge standpoint. And we're going to actually start now rolling this out to all of the leaders in the company, and then at least just from an information standpoint out to all of our associates, so that they'll be better prepared if they see it among one of their coworkers, or even possibly see it in themselves.
I'm going to try to make sure that we get 2 more questions in before we have to close the panel. So Yes, ma'am.
For the person who just asked, you can get the mental health first aid training at mhf.org. Brian, thank you for your presentation. As you kept talking, I said to myself, how does he sleep at night knowing what he knows? We had a discussion recently about using food and weaponizing it. Can you talk about that, if that has come up in your discussions at all? Thanks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Test. Maybe I need this. All right. Test. All right. This is, again, we have a mantra within CISA known as Secure Today, Defend Tomorrow. Or Defend Today, Secure Tomorrow, whatever it is. And we're still a new agency. I'm just kidding. My boss will not like that. However, it really speaks to this idea of day in and day out, we have the tactical things that we must adhere to. Power grid security, water system security, the financial system, these kinds of things. But we need to start looking big. We need to look beyond our current borders. We need to look beyond the threats of today. And this is really where I would advocate that you go to, and that is, let's not build our budgets based off of today's threats. Let's make sure we're looking forward and we're making the right investments in resilience, removing single points of failure, and adding redundancy. But that's not the answer to your question. The answer to your question is, I think the Department of Homeland Security right now, from a biodefense perspective, looking at the bioeconomy, the 23andMe, these kinds of things that potentially could have significant impact on the science side, including food security, need to be at the forefront. Yes, it's not bombs going off necessarily. It's not ones and zeros and ransomware. But these are real issues that other nation states, quite frankly, are well ahead of us. They are well ahead of us. And we need to make sure that we're putting brain cells on this particular issue so that we have a seat at the table and we can mitigate potential and future threats.
There was one more gentleman back here.
Do we have another question from the audience?
Right here.
Yes, sir.
Hi, this question is for Choice Hotels. There's something called Community Emergency Response Team Training. Are you emphasizing that to all of your employees globally?
Yeah, so great question. And as I mentioned, we are a franchise organization. So our hotels are not owned and operated by us. They're individually owned and operated, but we do provide very specific training, some that is required, some that is recommended, some that is, this is a great idea if you happen to have time while running your hotel and front desk. One of our trainings that we provide is training around, preparing plans like this, or actively having, making sure emergency routes are understood, or preparing for a natural disaster and knowing what numbers to call, what resources you have. So there's not anything that we require of them, but it is one of the recommended trainings that we make available through our, what we call Choice University. So it's training that's available online to all of our hotels and everybody at the hotel. So not just the general managers or owners, but all staff.
So with that was our last question. First off, I want to make sure that we thank this fantastic panel, Rick, Chelsie, Brian, everyone. Thank you so much for your help. And thank you very much to GTT for sponsoring this part of our discussion. And my thanks also to Booz Allen Hamilton for also being a sponsor of the American Red Cross. I would like to say that I saw both on the Department of Homeland Security CISA website as well as Choice Hotels websites, representation of the American Red Cross there, as we do within Booz Allen. There's nothing more important than the business that the American Red Cross does when we're in our deepest and darkest times. So again, thank you to all for your contributions and your participation. And again, let's thank our panelists again.